All right, folks, it is Friday, April 24th. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit. Welcome back. I'm joined by Tim the Source Anderson. Today, we have opening up of Georgia Day that we'll talk about a little bit. We're going to talk about what's going on out there in the markets. A lot moving. Tim's going to clue us in a second. Today, we're not going to go over a traditional voter file analysis like we've been doing. We're going to do basically laundry list of questions, Tim, from my DM, over the last few years. We're going to talk about polling, and we're going to,
Good.
Media keeps doing this to us, which is great, but they keep releasing these polls that really underscore the points that I wanted to make anyway. So we're going to talk about how survey wording and survey ordering of questions, what we generally call survey design, how much that can truly impact the results of a survey. And we're going to talk about the difference in data collection modes, which we're always speaking about when we're doing the voter analysis, when we're talking about different polls. But I always say, we're going to circle back and we're going to hit it. We're going to do that today because we've got a bunch of polling out, some from YouGov, some from big media outlets. We've had some comments from some verified Twitter accounts. I'm going to go ahead and address that. Okay, so all of the questions on my Twitter feed, all of the questions to my DMs from followers, watch the show because I'm going to get to a lot of them. I'll even swing back and I'll pick some of them out of the hat. Go into, if you're watching on Periscope, you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on Facebook, leave comments, send us comments. We can see them, right? They're all aggregated and we can see them. So we'll answer them. But for right now, we did have, I'm just going to let Tim do it. Tim, why don't you tell us what's going on in the markets out there and, give everybody a full scope here. We got the House vote, from
consumer sentiment just came out 71 point something, a little bit below 72. Consumer sentiment, Michigan consumer sentiment for
not as bad as I thought, actually.
It could be worse. Hey, it could be worse, But again, I don't think that's going to have an impact on the market, although the market is rallying a little bit in the last couple of minutes. The market's been all over the place, really, since futures trading at 9 o'clock. But I think we should talk about what happened in the market yesterday, because when we went off the air, we were up close to 2%, struggling a little bit. There's a lot of resistance at Dow Jones 24,000, at S&P 500 2850. I wrote a piece a little over a week ago saying that the market's really ignoring macro data right now. It's really ignoring corporate earnings because it knows that both of those data sets are totally tainted from a self-imposed shutdown on the economy, and that really what the market is trading off of is technicals. When you can't rely on fundamentals, the market's going to trade off technicals even more than it normally would. So the market's trading off technicals. It's trading off progress and fighting the virus. And it's trading off big eco-political considerations, mainly oil, which is why we saw such a sharp sell-off on Monday and Tuesday with the turmoil in the oil market. Yesterday, after we went off the air, the market was already hitting resistance, and we got headlines on this quote-unquote trial on Gilead's drug remdesivir. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it correctly. I think you know what I'm talking about.
That was really close. Remdesivir.
And it showed no progress in 350 patients, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The headline reading algorithms just crushed the market immediately. The financial news ran with the story because it was a big impact story. It was also being given credit for one of the reasons that the promise of that drug was being given credit for one of the reasons the market had extended its rally so significantly.
He's going to glitch back in. I'm actually shocked. Tim's the one having problems today. We had horrible thunderstorms and tornadoes, tornado watches. I don't know if anything ever touched down, but Tim's going to glitch. There he is. He's back. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's funny because it never. It never paused on my end.
It didn't. That's funny.
No,
All right.
it usually does. I usually get a spinning wheel when it's going off.
That's what you blinked out when we got the wheel. You came back. Finish your thought. Go ahead.
Okay, so the market gave up its gains yesterday. We're up about 1.75%, maybe 2%. We got all the way back down to even. We tried to rally numerous times. All those rallies were capped by the story of this Gilead trial for remdesivir. Well, guess what? The trial, if 300, it was not a clinical trial, first of all. And there are dozens and dozens of clinical trials, and I'm sure going on with remdesivir and with other drugs. This was a group of 350 people that were given this drug that were already either on respirators or had multiple comorbidities, and were well beyond the point, probably, where they were going to get positive results from a drug. And just to top it off, and I can't even make this stuff up, the trial was done in China. So futures were up. Futures were, I shouldn't even call it a trial. The collection, the 350 people that were given the drug were somewhere in China. We think that most of them were even alive when they were given the drug. So
it's so ridiculous. All we can do
futures were up 1%, close to 1% this morning. You've got some, obviously we're on the verge of states opening back up. And now we've given up some of those gains. The Dow's up 25 points. The S&P's up a little bit. Let's see here. The S&P's up about 5 points. The NASDAQ, similar amount. The Russell 2000 actually held in there better yesterday. It closed above 1,200. So it's overperformed a little bit the last couple of weeks. It doesn't sound like much, but I'd like to see this Russell get above the 1250, 1260 level. That's probably next week's business if it's going to happen. But, we'll just have to wait and see. I think
yesterday, Tim, we didn't really hit on it yesterday. You and I spoke about it later off air, but the new residential sales report came out yesterday. And while, it just like barely missed the consensus, it was right around it. And it came in at 627,000 on an seasonally adjusted annual rate, right? This is a joint report for people who don't know. It's released jointly by the Census Bureau and HUD, the Housing and Urban Development monthly report. And it's new home sales. That's the highlight. That's the headline, indicator that people are looking at.
Right.
They have the sales price and inventory numbers, which are also important. But, Tim and I were not expecting 627,000 on a seasonally adjusted rate. This is higher than as recent as, let me look as I have it. The March 2019 estimate was revised. February was revised. Better than expected is where I'm going with this. May 2019, these were under 600,000. Barack Obama would have cut off his left arm to be at these numbers. And we've been looking at this report because the Trump economy prior to this, was so much stronger on so many other levels. And the housing sector, Tim and I, private discussions would say, when this housing sector comes around, it's gonna be a shot in the arm. Then we'll be really firing on all four cylinders. And there was evidence of that right before this happened. And it looks stronger than we even thought it was. And I just find it funny because I expected this to be worse, Tim, and I'm sure you did too. And when we get the new pending home sales numbers, I think we're gonna they're a lobby. We should tell people this. The National Association of Realtors is a lobby, a very powerful lobby on K Street. So take it with a grain. It's not government data, but it is contracts of pending home sales. So if we want to see whether or not anybody pulled out or had, for whatever reason, maybe they're making that decision or they don't have the money, we'll get some better indicator of that. But wouldn't you agree, Tim, this report was stronger than I expected it to be?
Yes, it was a good report. And look, although it's not a government report, it is legitimate data. The only thing I would say about the NAHB is that they put out data, which is legitimate data, but they also put out surveys. And let's just be realistic. When they put out surveys, I mean, they're talking their book a little bit. I mean, they're in the real estate business, and they're going to always be, very few people out there have ever known too many realtors that were ever negative about the real estate market. So,
right. That's a great point. Never.
Look, there's a big debate out there, a number of different opinions as to whether or not this is going to cause what's going on right now how much structural damage it's going to cause to the economy. The contrast that I would make, if you go back to the global financial crisis, late, when all the proverbial shit started to hit the fan in the fourth quarter of 2008, there were definitely housing contracts, closing contracts that were done, that were canceled and walked away from within days of the scheduled closing date. Now, given here, some of these closing contracts might have been finalized in early March before the shutdown really started. But if they were scheduled in late March and they weren't canceled, that's a very different signal than what happened in the financial crisis in late in 2008. Now, I think that the timing of that was a little bit different. This is March. That was November. I think there were a lot of people, certainly in the metropolitan New York area, that worked for financial firms that somewhere along had gone to contract, maybe in August, September, October. And when between then and when the closing contract rolled around in November, a lot of them realized they probably weren't going to get a year-end bonus from their firm. And so they canceled a lot of them canceled their contract and probably at the risk of giving up their security deposit, depending on how tightly that contract was written. This is a different situation right now.
Yeah, that was a specific to the housing market.
Right. Why was the housing bubble bursting? That caused massive turmoil in structured collateralized mortgage obligations. Very technical topic, but this is. Look, there's going to be damage from what's going on here, but it's not quite. My argument would be it's not quite to the structural damage of what we saw 12 years ago.
I'm viewing this as padding, Tim. Why I'm happy about this is because this was stronger, and it tells me that the housing market that we were seeing coming around, circling back, think of it, folks, as like housing was coming to join the party. Finally, they were late to the party and they were coming back to join the party. And this tells me that it was stronger than we thought it was going to be, which I was already happy with. And National Association of Realtors last week had argued to us that when this is over, that housing is going to lead the rally. That is what, and like Tim said, they are realtors they are eternal optimists, and you will not find some realtor who's never happy about the house. But they made good points that because it was, what's his name, Yoon over there, Yoon. I can always forget his first name, but his argument was that they were just coming back, and he feels as long as this is temporary, of course, as long as this is a temporary halt, that he feels that people will circle back. They're just going to kind of hold their fire right now. We'll see. And then but this does support his argument because it shows that people were going out and pulling the trigger. There wasn't enough inventory, basically, Tim. That was the real problem with housing over the last couple of years. Yeah. That's ultimately why we built. There just wasn't inventory. And even now, what's this? For sale inventory and month supply is seasonally adjusted estimate of new houses for sale at the end of March was 333,000. This represents a supply of 6.4 months at the current sales rate. Folks, there was no inventory. This is a significant increase in the time of supply. I mean, Tim, it was like in 3 months.
Right.
4 point. It was bad. So basically, a house goes on the market.
6 months is not a long.
It's not.
It's not a huge amount of supply.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the market. I also think it's probably important to look at, and I haven't done it yet, to look at the regional breakdown from a report like this, because
Yeah. I didn't get a chance to either. Yeah,
the home building activities in California have just declined so significantly over the last at least the last 5 or 6 years, because the regulatory environment out there on building houses has just become incredibly onerous. And just given the population of the state, it has the ability to skew the national numbers significantly.
That's a great point, and that actually may help to explain some of why it was late to the party. Just for people who don't know, they don't read into the regional numbers like we do. The Northeast, so I don't mean this in any bad way. It's just true. The Northeast is traditionally the viewed as the dying area of the country. They're losing population. They're losing economic activity. The future is the South and the West, or at least that's what, economic numbers shows. The Midwest and the Northeast are hurting. So so put that in perspective of what Tim just said. So if you get a government that comes along and all of the fundamentals on the ground, their population surging, income surging per capita, average income, median income, and then the government does this, then it has the potential to really stifle what should otherwise be a natural large chunk of activity. And, so that may help to explain it and help to explain the lack of inventory. Is before, Tim, before we decided to do what we were doing, there was nothing. You liked the house, the realtor sent it to you. You looked at your schedule and you said, okay, I like this one. I want to go see this one. Let's go view it. Let's figure out next weekend, 2 weeks from now, whatever. I can break away from work and go look. Sorry, guys, it's gone. I mean, it was like that. Somebody put an offer, the offer's accepted, it's gone. So eventually we just said, the heck with it. We're gonna build. And that's what happened with us I'm talking about under the Trump economy, where all other things were good. There just was no inventory. There was nothing to buy, So I know I see some viewers, commenting on this. A lot of people have family and friends, that are in real estate. And, this particular thing, especially if you're in like New York and you have Cuomo, with his, I'm talking about the current situation. Probably April's going to be ugly, Tim, but I think
I would definitely think so.
What I'm saying is I think April might be the ugliest month if that is what we saw for February and March. And that, period, I look back, does include a lot of these orders, or not orders, but it was already becoming clear that people were going to start to shut down. I mean, with the other economic indicators, they had hit by the middle of the month or so. And then really, by the end of March, it was collapse time, but this is stronger than I thought. So, okay, let's take a look. A few other things here. So Trump goes to his press conference yesterday, and we're going to get into the Fox polls, all that, guys. I see your comments. We're going to get into that. All right. Let's deal with the daily numbers here. Oh, I was going to get Tim's thoughts on this. Oh, he's back. So Trump has this press conference yesterday, Tim. The health, his HHS has this study about, saliva, the virus in the saliva. And sometimes it's the way he talks. He just kicks himself. But I think we all understood what he meant. Nobody was talking about injecting forms of disinfectants, bleach, even like somehow harnessing sunlight. I mean, the way these people take things, they know what Trump means. They twist his words. I think what got lost here, though, Tim, is the importance of the study, which is, and by the way, incredibly, somebody sent me some incredible, it was a video explaining an actual treatment of harnessing safe levels of UVB. I'm not even kidding, So what do you make of this? Why does Trump do this to himself?
I think, look, the best description I've ever heard of it came from Peter Thiel. If people don't know who Peter Thiel is, he is a legendary private equity investor, a brilliant guy, a Silicon Valley icon. And he is a pro-Trump guy who very vocally moved out of the Silicon Valley area to the Los Angeles area about 1.5 to 2 years ago, and made very public statements that he just can no longer live in the ideological cocoon of Silicon Valley, the Silicon Valley area. And he said that the problem that that the Trump haters have, or the people that don't understand him, and is that they take him literally, but not seriously.
That's a great way to put it.
Trump's fan base, most of the people who really get Trump and who are supportive of him, they brush off a lot of his comments and stuff. They take him seriously, but not literally, because he says stuff that's other people wouldn't say, but they kind of know what he's saying. They know what he means, but so they take him seriously. But all of his little,
I could kill somebody on Fifth Avenue. Right. You know, that's a perfect example.
Yeah. Well, that was a little out of context too, because he said people have said
that. Yeah, of course. And but you know what they've been taking. The truth is, and we have something on People's Pundit Daily. People should look at if they have a chance. I tweeted it for some reason. I circled back to it last week, but we did something on People's Pundit Daily a while back, and it was like the top 4 media created myths to try to paint Trump as a racist from the very jump. From the moment this guy came down the escalator, I will never forget that. So I listened to every single word of that speech. I knew he was going to run. I'll tell that story another time, but you know, I knew he was, and I'm hearing the speech, Tim, and then they're like, Trump said all Mexicans are rapists, and I'm like, what? Where did you get that? But so they've been doing that to this guy for, you know, from the beginning. But I think what's important is the study, and I think I might have said HHS before it's DHS. What's important is the findings of this study, and then you know, we have done a lot on this now on People's Pundit Daily, because it is not new. The idea that sunlight and outdoors and UV rays, you know, it is not a new concept that they fight, you know, viruses, that it's good for viruses, that has beneficial, I would say.
That's one of the first things people were talking about, I mean, 2 months ago.
And they act like this is like some novel concept, you know. They run out of material, I think, Tim. I don't know, but
Trump also is so transparent, almost to a fault.
To a fault, yeah.
That he starts to ramble a little bit on occasion, and he does what I call thinking out loud.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't edit his own thoughts. He just kind of blurts them out on occasion. Right. And then people like get crazy. They go crazy over it.
And that's some stuff. What, you know, to some extent, that is part of why people like, you know, not, or at least even people who don't
like people like that
appreciate it. Right. Because
he talks the way average people.
Right.
A lot of normal people talk, you know?
And yeah, that's right. And, you know, they're in the business of like sugarcoating and carefully stringing together sentences. They don't sound like that themselves on off air, folks. Let me just break that myth right now. These people, their mouths are no better. Right, Tim? I mean, this is like, they are, it's such a farce. He just
look, most media people, when they're in the press room, when you see them standing there and, you know, 5 or 10 minutes before the event's going to start, and they're going on and giving their little spiel of, you know, what Trump's going to talk about at the press conference, they've got a teleprompter. They're going off a teleprompter.
Yeah. Right.
You know, that is not, you know, they're not just going, you know, that's all scripted and in front of them, and they're basically going off a teleprompter. 80 to 90% of media people that you see in front of a camera are going off a teleprompter, even if it looks like it's impromptu or something there, just repeating from their own personal knowledge.
That's right. That's
A
right.
lot of them are very smart, don't get me wrong. But when they're on camera for more than 20 or 30 seconds, they're going off a teleprompter.
That is so a lot. I think, we used to call it over here production news, right? Because almost nothing, like Tim says, you see on TV is real, in the sense that it's already been carefully scripted. And so I don't want to get in the business of hawking books on this show, but if you haven't read Cheryl Atkinson's The Smear, okay, this is just one element of how they do things, but it will give you a better understanding of how there is no real segment on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC that you're seeing because it's organic. Somebody wants you to see that segment, and they want you to hear what certain people have to say. I would really encourage people to read that book. It's an excellent book. But the study itself, the DHS study itself, I make a comment about it and then do some basic research, Tim. And there's stuff out there right now from Cedars-Sinai, working with a company called AYTU, crazy stuff, about which makes what Trump said, of course, not disinfectants. We're talking about UVs, which makes what Trump said not sound so crazy anymore, right? But they never will go into that. Like, they never bring that kind of level of reporting to people. They just don't. But the idea that, ultraviolet light, UVBs have had a beneficial use for viruses from SARS to MRSA to 1918 to tuberculosis, even, they believed it, is not new. And it's just funny. I just find it funny how they do this. I really do, Tim. How they act like something like this is novel. Yeah, it's not.
One of the first things that came to my mind was, even though I thought that maybe Governor Kemp's in Georgia's comments that we're going to open hair salons and beauty parlors and nail salons and a lot of stuff with obvious, very close personal contact was maybe a little misguided.
Right.
Maybe some of these states should say, one of the first businesses we're going to open is tanning parlors, so you can come in and get hit with UV rays to kill any virus that might be floating around in you.
The Trump special, half off for a half hour, right?
No medical prescription, no prescription required from your doctor.
No prescription needed. Oh, that's funny stuff. Yeah, look, say what you will about Donald Trump, but there is nothing not entertaining about this presidency. I mean, really, it gives us material every day. I almost, that alone, Tim, like, fear the days when we go back to the boring, dreaded presidency, because you say what you want about him. The man is entertaining. And like you said, transparent to a fault. There is no doubt that he is the most transparent president in our lifetime. That goes for whatever is rummaging around in his brain, that brain of his. And also, maybe the press briefings are, again, a show. That's production news. So when you hear the media complain, the press briefing hasn't ever, nobody cares about that. Is for them. The press briefing has morphed into a televised show where each reporter from each organization wants to get their 30-second to 1 minute clip of gotcha this, gotcha that. It is gone are the days for for it being for the purpose of informing Americans. It's pointless. It's totally pointless. But he will stop on the way when he's walking through the Rose Garden, and he'll talk to you for 10 minutes.
Press conferences, whether they're in the Rose Garden or in the press room, from the way they always used to be, is that it always used to be the person asking the question would be on camera, and then the president would be on camera.
Right.
So I would say that though occasionally they will still put the person asking the question on camera, but that has declined probably 75%.
Yeah.
Because the feeling was that the media and the people in the press room were just using it to, either showcase or showboat or, promote themselves, who are all trying to one up each other on what type of a gotcha question they could come up with to make a highly viewed highlight reel for their nightly news later that day.
You remember Ari Fleischer from the Bush administration?
Yeah.
He has had some really amazing thoughts on this, frankly. I mean, he doesn't support this at all. And, basically he says that these things should be done away because, it just doesn't fit. It isn't for the point. Its original point has been completely lost. That's what
they have done away with them, but I think now there's a very legitimate reason to have them
as often as they're the coronavirus.
Have them because
that's different.
This is a national event.
That's right.
And you need to have a format to get updated information, real information out to the American people that want to hear it and want to be informed in an unfiltered medium as frequently as possible. Now, some of them go on and on and on, but you know what? If you don't want to watch 2.5 hours of it, you don't have to watch 2.5 hours of it.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Yeah, this is something totally different. But I mean, you remember such a difference between the Obama administration, very carefully crafted press conferences. Not everybody, I'll tell you what, Ryan would not be allowed in the Barack Obama administration's press conference. It's just not. I mean, they are the Democratic president in general simply is not going to open the forum. And if and when there is, because of course there will be a Democratic president again, it's inevitable, they will close this off. So you better expect One America's gone. They're not those Skype seats, that whole idea, that's gone. They are only going to allow their legacy media, liberal, pre-approved press to go back to the press room. Trump has done something totally different. He's opened it up to everybody.
Look, it used to be the unofficial rule of the press conferences that Helen Thomas from the Associated Press, who would always get the first question.
That's right.
That was an unofficial rule, and it was always held to.
And for those of you who don't remember, controversial reporter, to be sure, but it was a long, like you said, an unspoken rule. She got it. And also there were unspoken rules about decorum. And they were hard on George W. Bush, and they were hard on his press secretaries and his spokesmen and women, but nothing like this, where it's downright disrespect. Right. And the reason why it bothers me, folks, is not Donald Trump. They have got the people who are in power and hold the powerful accountable seem to have forgotten very basics of our social contract. It is not Donald Trump who you are respecting. It is the voter. You are respecting their choice. And they would never have spoken to Barack Obama the way they speak to Donald Trump. They would never have spoken to Jim Carney or the other schlub the way that they spoke to Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Right. And they do. It's just never. No way. Right. I mean, we're at a level now where it's just it's a whole new level. All right, but it's 10:33. Let's go through it. Take a look at what the markets are doing. Then we're going to jump right into.
Rich, they're buzzing my door a second.
Go ahead.
Give me a couple minutes.
I'll cover this. Yeah, and then we're going to jump into what we're doing for today. And I'm going to, unlike when we do voter analysis segments, I'm going to try to leave this open as much as possible toward the end, because there's always a couple of questions that I don't get to. You guys ask some good questions, and there's always a couple that I don't get to because I'm trying to be thorough, or Tim is trying to be thorough in answering them. And we leave, there's like 2 or 3 orphaned questions at the end of the show. So considering the bombardment that we get, and often of a lot of the same questions, I want to leave a lot of space open to answer them, because this is on the technicals of polling. This is not just, what does a poll say? Let's slap a graph up. I'm going to explain to you there are different ways to poll. There are different expectations you should have depending on those. Look at the way a survey is worded. What was the order in which questions were asked? And we're going to look at a couple examples of those. All right. So it is 10:34, almost 10:35 on Friday, April 24th. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit. He is off right now to the races, but I'm joined, as always, by Tim the Source Anderson. You could follow me, folks, at peoples_pundit on Twitter if you're not already, and you can follow Tim at TJ Anderson1. If you guys are watching on Periscope, give us those hearts. We love those hearts. Go ahead and follow the accounts that you are watching on, whether it's mine or People's Pundit Daily, or both. That'd be great too. Facebook Live watchers, which there are a growing number. So this is great. I hear the video quality on Facebook Live is amazing. Don't forget to like the page. I don't know how there are that many views and we're not getting that many page likes or, close. So go ahead and like the page on People's Pundit Daily. We long abandoned that Facebook page because most of our stuff is just Twitter. And now we need to kind of play catch up. And doing YouTube from the ground up, we're having a good run. Let's not slow it up. Let's get to that milestone, folks. So if you watch the show, you like the show, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends and family, tell them to watch. There's nothing else like this around. All right. And of course, the ultimate way to support the show is to subscribe to People's Pundit Daily. That's how we bring you all this. That's how we have databases of millions of voters. That's how we have these neat little graphics and how we pay for software, so for all this stuff. So go ahead and do that. You could either visit the website or go to ppdnews.us/subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. Go get some data for your dollar. You can either do a monthly, an annual, or a credit-based if you just want to read something specific. And Tim, perfect time. Let's check out what's going on with the markets. I'm going to pop it out real quick, grab that chart because I found that chart. I'm going to put it in, and I'll be back in a moment.
So the markets really, I just have are treading water a little bit above where they closed yesterday. I call it fractional gains. They're up less than 0.25%. But I do think it's somewhat positive that the S&P 500 is a little bit above 2,800. There's a lot of resistance between 2,850 and 2,900. It's run into that level a couple of times in the last 2 weeks and been turned back. But we're holding the 2,800 level, and the NASDAQ is holding the 8,500 level. The NASDAQ is also holding its 200-day moving average, which has probably been above maybe 6 of the last 8 days. That's at around the 84.25 level. So the NASDAQ just above 8,500, kind of a big psychological round number for the NASDAQ. And the Dow 23,500, almost 23,600. It's up about 50 points. That's really, it's less than 0.25%. And I just think that a lot of investors today are saying, okay, well, we've got some states that are either starting to open or on the verge of going to reopen. The market absorbed a lot this week, given the sell-off we had the first 2 days, and has reasonably recovered from some of that. It's a Friday. No reason to make any big decisions. Let's see what comes at us next week.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the last segment consumer sentiment, and it'll be up. That'll be up on PPD soon. But I just wanted to let folks know the range here because we're kind of on the topic of, or the theme this week is maybe some of this stuff is arresting, right? And the consumer sentiment, which is out of the University of Michigan, it's really the survey of consumers for those who want to look it up. The consumer sentiment index is the top of it's the top line number for 2 separate subcomponents, which looks at current conditions and the 6-month outlook, right? Anyway, the top line index of consumer sentiment index, the consensus, the range, it was a low of 55 to a high of 71. The consensus was 68. And as Tim told you before, it came in at 71.8. So there's a lot, because we saw a huge fall, the biggest fall ever on record, I believe it was last month, or at least for the prelim, right? It actually ticked up slightly, folks. It actually ticked up. I want to say that again because this is for April, all right? There's a preliminary reading that happens about mid-month, and then they revise for the month. So in March, it was 71. and it ticked, which is, I find this funny, Tim, because consumer sentiment acts more.
Was this for April, or was this the revision for March?
No, this is for April. This is the new one today for this morning is for April. March was revised to 71. So that's March's reading. I think this is funny because I would have expected April to be worse. And there again, there's prelims and then there are revisions. You get 2 readings per month. So I'm a little bit stunned at that, but it goes with the theme that we've had that maybe, and hopefully some of this has been arrested. There will be a better write-up. If you missed the one from last month, provides a lot of historical context. If you missed that on People's Pundit Daily, I'll link it here later, but also go back and read it because we looked at other recessions, other prior periods where we had even just temporary crises like this. And this one we're not seeing those 2 consecutive or 3 consecutive month, whacks. So that's interesting, giving the retail sales report. I'm not going to celebrate early, but I was looking at that low end of the consensus and seeing 55, and I'm thinking that's probably about right. Ugly as hell, but probably about right. And we're not near that, Tim. We're 20 points off that almost, so, or 15, let's not overstate it, so, okay, let's get into some of the polling stuff. And I will just say, Jim Carney he abused reporters. You see that comment, Tim? That's so true. Not only did reporters not speak to the White House and their spokesmen and women like this under Obama, but they were like downright abusive to some of those reporters, and they just took it. I mean, look, these are people who they took a wiretap, and they were all right with that. James Rosen, his parents were named in a FISA. I mean, this is just crazy, But anyway, I digress. I found a chart that I was kind of like wigging out about with Tim before we went on air. I said, Tim, I can't find it. I really wanted to show you this chart because in 2016, we took a lot of criticism for being an online only panel. Now, I like mixed mode. Personally, my own philosophy is that mixed mode polling is the gold standard. They will tell you, and the big media will tell you that cell phone or live caller really, but then they do usually like a 60-40 split between to cell phones and to landlines. And then you will see sometimes 70-30, sometimes even 80-20. I think there are still benefits to interactive voice response because you can give a respondent anonymity. And we're going to get into all of this in more detail about different modes of data collection. But I want to bring up first, we'll save data collection modes for last. All right. And there's a reason for that. Let's first talk about how surveys can be badly tainted and the results can be badly impacted by how a pollster decides to word the survey and then the order in which they ask a question. And then also sometimes, Tim, like I saw this morning with ABC News, we're going to pull them up. This is another level. I mean, I have to add this into what I was talking about before. In 2018, I'm going to use Rasmussen reports as an example of this because I think, one, they got some unfair criticism, and two, there is, and this article you can find on Rasmussen as well. I don't know that I'm going to pull it up. You know what? Yeah, let me pull it up. Let me just show you. I was going to read off of it, but let me just show people the title. So if they want to go and read it on PPD, they can. The name of the article was Polling Critics Who Work in Glass Houses Shouldn't Throw Stones. And the point of this article was twofold. In 2018, and Tim and I spoke about this yesterday on the show, the big media pollsters tried to use the results of their national House vote generic ballot polling to give you the impression that all was fine. They have fixed their problems since 2016 and that they are trustworthy. They skewered Rasmussen reports, if you guys remember, because their congressional vote was Republican +1, while the Democrats clearly won by 9 points. And they said that they were the least accurate poll because their House vote, generic ballot, was wrong. Okay. We're going to get into how wording matters. But before we do, let me just bring up some of the results me and Tim have talked. And Philip Bump attacked Rasmussen reports. And he says, Trump also likes to cherry pick polls that show what he wants to see, such as the consistently generous polls from Rasmussen reports that several times have shown him with much more robust support from Black Americans than other pollsters. And then they go in, I think there's Harry Enton in here I talked about, Nate Silver. And they just went ahead and they trashed Rasmussen because they don't want you to look at Rasmussen in this upcoming election. All right. And yes, Rasmussen was close on the popular vote. But here's a textbook example of why wording matters, and that in big media, the people who are seen as authority on polls don't really know much about polling. They're not pollsters themselves, and they really don't have a clue, right, Tim? But here, real quick, I want to get into, because if Rasmussen was wrong, then what are they? Right?
By the way, I had never seen before the time period you're talking about anybody ever try to transition the vote and call it they lost a congressional national vote. I had never seen that metric used before.
Right. And that's where I'm going to get in truth. And I'm going to be fair here. I'm not trying to apologize for Rasmussen. I'm going to be fair here. We don't word our generic ballot the way they word theirs. And I'm going to explain why it was a little, the criticism was unfair, but at the same time, I would have worded the question a little differently, Tim. But before we get into whether or not, it's fair, or not, let's talk about, these are people that are saying, but these are people that are saying that you cannot listen to Rasmussen because they were inaccurate about their House vote. Let's take a look at their track record, Tim, for 2018. It doesn't really, their House vote. They want to focus on the House vote, and they want to slam Rasmussen reports because they don't want you to know this. CNN, the very outfit for which Mr. Enton was writing when he criticized Rasmussen reports, they missed the gubernatorial contest in Florida by 13 points. They heard it less than a week later. But that was a poll that never saw coverage. It was a PDF that was put out, linked to Wikipedia later, linked to Real Clear Politics later. They did not run headlines that showed Gillum ahead by just 1 point in their final poll. That one saw no headlines. A week before, however, the Gillum plus 13 poll was played 24/7 for several days. Quinnipiac, another one of the big media's favorite traditional pollsters. They had both candidates, Democratic candidates had Bill Nelson and Rick Scott by 7 points. They both lost, folks. They both lost. P.S. Voters don't move like that. It was never D plus 13. It was never Nelson or Gillum plus 13 or plus 7. They were just always wrong. The CNN put that last herd poll out at the end to cover their butt. But again, it never saw coverage. It's just for people like me and then themselves later so they can go back and cover themselves. But that was never added to the narrative at all. Remember, Tim, DeSantis had no choice. DeSantis had no chance, of winning that election. Do you remember? Right. Yeah. All right. That was the narrative. Anyway, Rasmussen was actually more accurate in Florida. They polled later in September, and they found Nelson leading Rick Scott by just 1 point, a very reasonable result. At that very same time, we tracked Florida. People can go and see it. We had Scott up by, I believe, 2 at that time, but we're talking about a 3-point difference. That's at least justifiable. Okay, it's sampling errors. That's at least justifiable. CNN missed in Tennessee by 7 points. They claimed in their headline that it was a competitive race within the margin between, quote, now Republicans, between who is now Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn and Democrat Phil Bradenson. Again, the, quote, competitive race. The Democrat was defeated by 11 points in that state, nearly 11 points. In Ohio, not a single poll gave Republican Governor Mike DeWine the lead over Richard Cordray. Not a single poll in the final months. The NBC News Marist poll gave DeWine a lead going into June, but then they heard it anyway in late September. Herding, for those who don't know, also called mirroring, all right, depending on who you're talking to. It is when a pollster has a largely different result in a poll that was conducted before their last poll or their finals, And typically this happens as we get closer to the election because it matters more. You'll see a pollster herd, okay, which means they get closer to the mean or the averages that you see on Real Clear Politics. They're not. Sometimes it's more accurate to look at a pollster's second to last poll. I swear. I know this is crazy, but if you want to get an idea of where they were coming from, sometimes it's more accurate to look at their second to last poll because they get spooked. They're human beings like the rest of us. I'm not going to blow this one up because I actually like them, but they had the Florida race relatively right. And Tim knows, you saw our daily data. I sent it to Jerry Willis every day. That race was Rick Scott's race. He fundamentally had it built in. It was going to be very close, but he was ahead more than he was behind. DeSantis, the reason why, and he actually won by about 30,000 more votes in the end. The reason why that race shook up the way it did is because Florida wanted to vote for Andrew Gillum. They did. After 2 years or more, actually, because of the consecutive Republican leadership, they wanted to. But in the end, Pinellas County, Monroe, these kinds of areas just could not square with Gillum's corruption problems. And also, if you look at our polling, go to Big Data Poll, you will see when you polled Gillum's agenda, it was bad. Do you remember that, Tim? It was bad. They just didn't agree with him, and they wanted to vote with him.
But Rich, is Rick Scott the master at winning close elections in Florida, or what?
He is the giant slayer. He is the giant slayer. I still have I think it's like some History Channel thing, and it has this ad in it that I've mentioned before in the show, Tim, where he's walking in the neighborhood, and he said, I didn't grow up rich. I had a single mom, and he's like walking down the road hand in hand with what is now a Hispanic neighborhood. He is the master at slaying giants, and Bill Nelson was actually still well liked, but Governor Scott, well, I'm always going to call him Governor Scott. Why? In case I slip up again, because first of all, I live in Florida for now still, and I have for years. I was here the entire time he was governor, and I watched that man during Hurricane Irma. And sometimes leadership shows. You really show who is a natural born leader. And for me, during Irma, which was a storm that was the size of bigger than the entire state, it was very concerning. I've been through a lot of hurricanes. They don't frighten me. Irma concerned me. It was huge, and she was scary. And the man did what he had to do. He was on point. His image changed. I've never seen a political image change like this, Tim. He was never popular, really. He always won with like a 42% approval rating, And then the Irma changed his image, and it's pretty easy to see why if you followed him like I did during Irma. So I'm always just, even though he's a senator now, I'm always going to refer to him as Governor Scott. It's just the way it is in my head. But yeah, he is a giant killer. Tim is right. He ran against Alex Sink for governor, and he ran against Charlie Crist, who was a very popular Republican governor when Crist had flipped. But he saw that opening with Bill Nelson, which was that Bill Nelson was liked. He was seen basically as a space hero, very liked even by Republicans, older Republicans in this state, especially in South Florida. That is how he's been able to win. But Scott saw that opening, and he took it. But yeah, so we went through Ohio. Also, McCaskill, by the way, the NBC News Marist poll, Tim, they had McCaskill leading Josh Hawley by 3 points. That was a 9-point miss. They missed by 6 in Tennessee. The Fox poll, which we'll talk about in a bit from today, equally unreliable, if not more unreliable on the state level. Remember, why do I care about this? Because the Electoral College is decided on the state level, not the national vote. It doesn't matter what the national vote says anymore. I mean, it almost doesn't matter. Given Joe Donnelly a 7-point edge over Mike Braun is not defensible. In the end, it was a 13-point miss. In Missouri, Fox had McCaskill tied with Hawley at 42 or 43%. A 7-point miss.
Where'd that come out? That came out at 7 points?
7 points. Yep. And
Hawley won that by 7.
He did. He won it by 7. And I could go about 6 points something, Tim. So, rough. Yeah, I think it rounds up to 7. But, I could go on and on, but I think I'm proving my point. But they're taking Rasmussen and putting Rasmussen reports in the crosshairs because they don't want to have to defend those terrible state level track records. So they're going to say, let's focus on the national vote and let's smear Rasmussen reports. Here's what they said. And Nate Silver, I'll go back up to read. I took that down because it was so small, people couldn't really read it anyway. He tweeted, this is the pollster who said that Republicans would win the popular vote for the U.S. House. In other words, he was saying it's the most, and he does in that tweet, flatly say they were the most inaccurate poll. Here's the problem with that. And criticizing Rasmussen reports would be easy, but it won't change the state record that they have. And it doesn't get to the crux of what happened here, which I'm doing all this to get to the concept of how it is a reality, how wording a survey can change the result. It's true. The final Rasmussen, what they call a generic or general congressional ballot, gave Republicans a 1-point advantage in 2018. That is absolutely true. But it's also true. None of these analysts and forecasters are pollsters. So they don't objectively look at really anything. This is how Rasmussen worded the survey. Okay. I think it was, here it is. Thinking ahead to November. Or no, that's how we worded it. They worded it. If the election for Congress were held today, would you vote for the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate? Again, let me read this so you guys can compare how we ask it. Now, I'm going to explain to you the difference. If the elections for Congress were held today, would you vote for the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate? Most Americans, folks, I don't want to overgeneralize, Tim, but when they think of Congress, they think of the totality of Congress. We don't hope that they understand the difference between a congressional election and a senatorial election. This is how we word the question. Thinking ahead to November, if the election in your congressional district was held today, would you vote for the Republican candidate, the Democratic candidate, or someone else? Again, thinking ahead to November, if the election in your congressional district was held today, would you vote for the Republican candidate, the Democratic candidate, or someone else? And by the way, those are rotated, so I don't want to hear anybody, now you put Republican first. They're rotated at random, and so are the answers. All right. If the elections for Congress were held today, can be taken to mean the Senate or the Congress, Tim, or your actual representative in the House. It didn't distinguish the difference between a congressional election in a district for the U.S. House of Representatives. And by the way, sometimes we say if the election in your congressional district for the U.S. House of Representatives was held today. Instead, Rasmussen said if the elections for Congress, if people doubt at all that could matter, look at the vote in the Senate. Republicans lost more than 40 seats in the House, but they picked up 2 in the Senate. That's the most, by the way, since Kennedy for a first-term incumbent presidential party. And with the point I'm trying to make here is there was a split result. If you're not going to distinguish the difference between the House and the Senate, then you could very well, screw up your results like that. I mean, that's my point. Tim, let me ask you a question. How many Americans, and I'm not trying to put anybody down here, I'm simply saying when you're a pollster, you have to lay it out for them. You cannot just hope that somebody understands the difference. So I think while the criticism was unfair of Rasmussen, it was unfair, then and they're targeted so that we don't pay attention to the state level blunders by big media polls, their favorite polls. They targeted Rasmussen. And the only criticism I would say there is that how many people do you know? Let me ask you this simply. How many people do you know, if you were just simply asked Congress, they would know you are talking about the House instead of the Senate or both? You know what I mean?
I would say probably 2 to 1.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Congress is clearly both the House and the Senate, but a lot of people would say, well, that's the House, just because the Senate has kind of its own identity. I mean, the House kind of does too, but your typical generic, non-politically charged person could very easily associate Congress with the House, before then also saying, oh, yeah, well, obviously the Senate is involved also, 435 members versus 100. That would be your knee-jerk reaction to the guy off the street that had a little bit of awareness but wasn't really a follower.
Yeah.
That's just kind of my gut reaction.
And I just, to close this one out before we move on to tactics that they use and the ordering in which they ask these questions, just for because you got to be fair to Rasmussen here. There was no specific reference to the U.S. House. Personally, I would have worded the question the way that I just read it to you guys. That's how I think it poses a danger that respondents might give their preference for either chamber. But Rasmussen acknowledged that lack of distinction in an article that they published on Friday after the election. And they noted, quote, by the way, party preference are both combined into the concept of Congress, unquote. Given the survey wording, Tim, and the split result of the 2018 midterms, it doesn't surprise me that they had R+1. It doesn't. Republicans lost a slightly higher average, a little higher number of seats in the U.S. House for a first-term incumbent party midterm. They won an above-average number in the U.S. Senate, the most since 1962. Nevertheless, the media ignored that response. So to ignore that, the pollsters' response and your own outlet's failures is like a double disingenuous act. They are using Rasmussen to distract from their failures and ignoring. If you guys can go and look, you can see their response. It's a credible response. If you're a pollster, if you poll and if you're media and you don't, or if you're some arbitrary, keeper of polling grades, then you don't know because you're not a pollster, and Americans would never know it. But the private polling industry doesn't operate like this. We do talk to each other and learn from each other about wording, about ordering. The difference is big media talks at each other and at you, and they learn nothing from either. All right, that wraps up that segment. We'll get back to ordering and how they play these little games. We're going to look at ABC today. And another big offender, a lot of that is YouGov does a lot of what we're about to talk about. I'm not, maybe it's intentional, maybe it's not, but we're going to talk about how, these are violations of polling 101, folks. But before we do that, let's get into the market update. Tim, what's going on out there? We just had, a slew of, headlines. And it's
very similar to what was going on 30 minutes ago or even at 10 o'clock. We're just fractionally lower than where I think the Dow was up 50. Now it's down 20. That's a meaningless move, really. The NASDAQ is just fractionally higher. So is the S&P. S&P still holds 2,800. The NASDAQ holding 8,500, just by very, very, very small amounts. It could change in a minute. But one thing I would mention is Intel reported earnings last night. They were okay earnings, no doubt about it. But the one thing we saw from them that we've seen from a number of other companies when they've reported earnings, and one of the reasons I feel that investors are just pretty much discounting earnings and economic data right now, is that they said they're pulling all of their guidance for the remainder of 2020. We've seen this from a large majority of companies that have reported earnings so far for Q1 this season, because it's just unrealistic to expect that any company can give you meaningful, well thought out guidance for the rest of the year when we don't know the timetable for completely reopening the economy, and we don't know what trajectory we're going to be on when that happens. So I think that companies pulling their guidance for earnings for the remainder of 2020 is something we're going to continue to see, and I think it's the right thing for them to do.
It's good stuff. And guys, for the question shout out we just did today too, I just did a second ago. If you have one for Tim, throw it in there as well. Not just the polling. So, because it is Friday, so we're gonna go through the weekend without market updates. Get your fill now. All right. So next, I want to move on to survey design, not just wording, but the ordering of questions and how they are put together sometimes. And then we'll get later into data collection modes, which I'm going to save for last, along with questions. All right. But they helped me out again here today, Tim, and I'm going to pop this up. Okay. I want to show people, this is my own Twitter screen. This is an ABC News poll today. All right. That came out. And if you guys can't read, it says just in, this was this morning, 98. Wow. That's a uniform number. 98% of Democrats and 82% of Republicans align with the view that social distancing and stay-at-home orders are responsible, life-saving actions, according to the new ABC News Ipsos poll. For those of you who don't know, Ipsos polls a lot in the UK. You'll see they do a lot of UK parliamentary elections, but they are also the pollster for Reuters. They are the pollster that they did pretty well, by the way, with the conservative majority that won handily in the last UK election, general election. But they did underestimate them. And they, by the way, if you look inside where they thought those gains would be made, they were long. They were wrong. I mean, you get the top line number right, but you get it's like here you get the demographics wrong. So maybe you mistook which states would, give those vote shares. But in the end, your top line was generally right. Look at how, again, they worded the question. Here we go again. Which of the following statements come closest to your point of view, even if not exactly right? Social distancing and stay-at-home orders are an overreaction by government that are taking away people's freedoms. Let me read that again. Social distancing and stay-at-home orders are an overreaction by government that are taking away from people's freedoms. Look at the question for yourself, folks. What planet, where on earth a basic 1-year statistician, a student studying statistics in college would know that you should not have put those questions together? Social distancing and stay-at-home orders are two totally different policies. Social distancing at this point and stay-at-home orders are not they're not synonyms for each other, right, Tim? I mean, right. They're totally different things. And that social distancing and stay-at-home orders are responsible government policies that are saving lives. How can you possibly ask that together? Unless, of course, you are trying to use the popularity or at least the common sense idea that social distancing, which can be done in public, is my point. Social distancing can be done in public. There is no reason for stay-at-home orders to be on that question. It should have been, which of the following statements comes closest to your point of view, even if not exactly right? Social distancing. A, B, C, D. Do you agree? Yes, no, whatever. And then it should say stay-at-home orders. And they should be separate. This is a classic example of a pollster using a gimmick to be able to piggyback off of the popularity of another policy. They are not remotely the same policies. One can exist separate of the other, and they are separate, in fact, just separate public policies. All right? And then again, it's the order in which these questions are given. And another repeat offender of this, Tim, is YouGov. They slam things together like this, and then they'll ask something like, do you approve of Donald Trump's outrageous behavior on Twitter? And then they'll be like, And then 2 questions later, they'll say, do you approve of the job Donald Trump is doing as president? Approval ratings and vote preferences should come before any other controversial topics, any questions of public policy, anything that could be construed or remotely even give the appearance of bias on the survey should come after you ask vote preferences and approval ratings. The only thing you can conceivably put, if you don't want to taint the survey, and it is a common practice and it is acceptable to ask certain basic demographic questions before you ask about vote preferences or approval ratings. Policies come after that. If you say, for instance, if you were to look at our polling in Florida, we were just talking about in 2018, if we were going to poll the gubernatorial election, we asked first, who are you going to vote for or leaning to vote for? Ron DeSantis, Andrew Gillum, or one of the other myriad candidates, which, by the way, we always put as many candidates as is filed. If it's on the ballot, the pollster should try to mimic the ballot as closely as possible. 2016 was never a race between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. It was a race between Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Gary Johnson, and Jill Stein, and even Evan McMullin in certain states. Putting just, or omitting people who are on the ballot is a bad idea, and it will get a pollster in trouble. But, this is the idea that if you look at our polling in Florida, you will see that we asked the vote preference question before we got into Andrew Gillum proposes this for Medicare. Ron DeSantis proposes this for school choice. If you ask those first, you'll say, well, maybe the voter who's at home didn't know that Ron DeSantis supported school choice. Maybe they didn't know that, but you just told them. So now guess what? They're gonna say that they're voting for Ron DeSantis if they agree. You don't know whether they know that or not. And you can't give them any information that they wouldn't have the day they walk into the ballot box. You cannot tell them Andrew Gillum's going to expand Medicare. Andrew Gillum's going to expand Medicaid. If they don't know that, you have to ask the vote preference question before any questions about policy. And this one, Tim, I'll tell you what, I've seen a lot over the last couple of years. I have never seen a pollster put two policies together like this. What do you make of this?
They probably legitimately viewed them as one and the same.
You know what? That may be true.
I'm sure a lot of people would.
I mean, honestly, I know it could be far-fetched for some of you guys out there to believe. That may be true. I am serious. They are not. Sometimes Tim and I say some of them are smart. Some of them some political reporters aren't. But
they could have had an intern put that together.
But that would be a severe problem, Tim. I mean, you should not be having, and just, from my own experience with media companies or doing any polling for media companies or putting together proposals for media companies, it's a little hard to do if you don't know, for people who don't know this, the cost of a survey is generally dictated by the time it takes to get through the survey. So how many questions the client wants to ask the population that they're targeting, and then also the actual data collection mode. So do they want a live caller poll? Do they want a mixed mode survey? So is it just online, or is it online and a certain percentage with interactive voice response to landlines? Or, like an 80-20 split. This is the stuff that dictates the cost of polling. And just my own personal experience, it's the media company's polling or political editor that I am directly dealing with and talking with about these things. And if they had some kind of intern, and I have heard, by the way, like, I know it sounds crazy for people to believe, but Tim may be right. At CNN, I know for a fact at CNN, they have some low-level people working on question ideas I don't know if they always did that, but I know of a particular instance where that happened, and that should not be the case. I mean, and then any deficiency for when they're working on survey design, if there's any area in which the media company is deficient, it is the pollster's job to say, I can't do that. Why? Why can't you? Social distancing and stay-at-home orders are not the same policies. It would be unethical. It is not ethical for me to mislead people like this or mislead the respondent. We need two different questions.
But Rich, you know that it happens, especially in a crazy 24-hour news cycle that we've got right now, with stuff like coming at you nonstop, like it's coming out of a fire hose. You know that, like, somebody could easily say, hey, are you working on anything right now, to some junior person or intern? No, I need to put together a poll on blah, 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 blah. This is what we did for the last one. Just write something up and show it to me before it goes out.
Right.
So somebody writes something up, shows it to the guy, looks at it for 30 seconds, doesn't really read it in detail. He's got 3 other things he's working on a deadline with. Yeah, okay, just put it out there. Let's go.
Some of it may be about money too.
I mean, you told me that you thought some pollsters at 16 were plugging numbers.
Oh, I know. I know somewhere filling in the gaps. Yeah, right. But it's Ipsos, and Ipsos does a lot with online panels, so it would be very easy. I mean, I maybe even when you do the market update, if I remember, Tim, I'll pull up like one of the survey softwares that we use for online. It would be very easy to put in like a matrix question and ask. And what that does is because you're not asking on the phone. So somebody clicked on a link, or you sent an invitation to the panel, they clicked on it, they're going to take the survey. And when they do, they're doing this on their browser or on their phone or whatever. I mean, everything's responsive. It would have been very easy for a matrix question or a multi-tiered question, folks, where you ask that question, which of the following statements comes closest to your point of view, even if not exactly right? And then below in the grid are different policies that you could ask, and separate. It's just so easy, Tim. It's so easy. And there's no way Ipsos doesn't have the polling capabilities that we have online. Of course they do. I just I should really pull up and I could make a really quick example and show people, because this stuff's got to stop. It's got to stop. And in an era where people don't trust the polls, I mean, look, it's so easy. I look at the comments, Tim, it's just so easy for people to say they're just doing this for a narrative. And I have a very hard time pushing back on that, because at some point it was the pollster's job to say, we need to split this up. We need to split it up. And if they're working with ABC News, they shouldn't have an intern on it. They just shouldn't, and right. By the way, I mean, an intern should know this. An intern should definitely know that you don't ask policies before you ask approval ratings. Some of this stuff I cannot defend, because they should know this. They absolutely should, Tim. It's very basic, very rudimentary stuff. Speaking of rudimentary, I will bring up the Fox poll before we go to.
Did you happen to see Parscale on with Martha McCallum last night?
I didn't, but clue me in. It probably fits this. Clue me in.
Well, of course, they have Fox News polls out. They see the they had the she talked to them about the battleground states poll that they have, and the poll that they have showing an extraordinarily large deficit that he has with suburban women, or maybe women in general. I can't recall the exact details of it. And he was just, look, we're way out in front of the election right now. I encourage people to, there were polls 6 months before the election in 2016 that showed us down by 20 points to Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
He was very strong. I mean, he was very confident, very strong. He goes, "We have our own polling. We're very confident of how this election is going to turn out when we get into the nitty gritty and much closer to November 3rd. And we're even looking at states beyond those battleground states where we feel we have, depending on, how things go, where we have legitimate opportunities to make inroads. Rattled off the number of a few states. I don't want to trigger you by saying he mentioned New Mexico, but he might have. He listed it along with 6 or 8 other states. If he cuts that deficit in half from 4 years ago, he'll say, "See, I told you we made a lot of progress in New Mexico."
We're going to get into New Mexico, but he is absolutely.
But he was very strong. He was very strong. He said
about where Trump's position is.
We are not going to
2016.
He talked about how well they did with women last time when the backdrop was much worse than it is now on Trump's, what was it? 6 weeks after the Planet Hollywood, not Planet Hollywood, you know what I mean?
Yeah, Access Hollywood.
Hollywood tapes.
Tim, there have been in the last, because I know they released Florida yesterday. There have been, and they had the Michigan and Pennsylvania before that. I have talked to numerous other people. I mean, that that we powwow with on this stuff. They want my opinion and I want theirs. Right. There's some screwy stuff with those Fox polls. I mean, he
didn't say
because he doesn't want to insult me.
He didn't say you're dreaming. He didn't say the Florida poll is completely nuts. You got to be dreaming.
It's great,
but he was like, we're very confident in Florida.
We've been over the numbers. We did the show on Florida already. I would urge a lot of pollsters, especially ones who are just getting into this game. Even, the Fox poll, look at them. At Quinnipiac, we just read you the list, folks. I mean, they cannot hide from these numbers, especially new pollsters and firms that are getting into this game. Florida's my state, and I'm telling you, don't embarrass yourself. Do not embarrass yourself because they wave 15 or 20 grand in front of you for a live caller and mixed mo poll just because you want that money. Maybe consider whether or not you know enough about this state. It's a very large state, and 400, 600 answers.
10 major media markets.
Yes. And 400 responses, 600 responses. You bet. Just be careful before because you cannot undo a bad track record, is my point. It's very difficult. The Fox poll, Tim, rudimentary psephology, Tim. Rudimentary stuff. Elementary, I should say. President I think it's 53% approval.
Right.
Do not get low 40 vote shares, Tim. I mean, it's just great. Something very wrong.
I'd love to get your thought on one topic that I've think is just fascinating when you compare Texas, which you went into in great detail yesterday, with Florida. And there is one major demographic difference between the two states that I've really never heard anybody talk about. And I know about it because I lived in Florida for 5 or 6 years. The big difference is, and the population in Texas is a little bit larger than Florida, I realize that. But Texas has major population centers of 1 million people or more. The Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, megalopolis probably has over 5 million people in it. Houston is a town of 4 million people. I think it's the 4th largest city in the country. I don't know what the population of San Antonio is. It's got to be over 1 million people. Even El Paso, I think, has 900,000 people into it in the defined area of El Paso. With the suburbs, it's probably a little bit larger. So there's 4 or 5, I'm probably missing 1 or 2 major metropolitan areas in Texas with vast, extremely low population areas scattered around the state, but still a lot of people everywhere. Florida's completely different. You don't have one city of 1 million people. Jacksonville's probably the largest population city in the state with 700,000. Sure, the Miami area has over 1 million people, but you're talking a collection of a dozen or two cities. And you don't have, where you have major corporate entities headquartered in Texas, from Texas Instruments to American Airlines to AT&T to Dell Computer to, Compaq Computer was there. It's to the major oil companies in Houston. Name me more than 2 or 3, not even household name S&P 500 companies headquartered in Florida.
Well, so what's the question though?
So the point is, you have these major multi-million population centers.
And Broward too. Broward, we missed out before Broward County.
But it's so much more spread out in Florida. You've got population everywhere in Florida.
And you have big red counties in Florida too, which is very different from a lot of other places.
But you don't have half a dozen areas in Florida that have like multi-millions of people.
And that's a challenge for Democrats, Tim. And then you brought up one before. So like you have the Miami area, right? These are areas where Democrats run it up or try to run it up. One of the major challenges that they have in Florida is that area is not like it's not like Broward, where it's going to go 75-25, or something like that. It's not. And, Trump got in Miami-Dade like 42% of the vote because we have.
Well, the Cubans and the Venezuelans are going to vote with Trump.
Yeah, they are. And they're going to vote heavy for him too. Yep. Mitt Romney, he lost that state by 70,000 votes. That could have been the Cuban population alone almost, I'm talking about the break because he just didn't pull the kind of margins that Trump pulled, and he lost that area by more. The reason why Trump was able to keep that margin tighter is because he has a higher, stronger support from the Cuban community. And then also, it's not just that they have like that. That's why they are getting more bullish on Texas, because they have 2 huge population centers, and they feel like if they could just run it up there, if they just do moderately better in the other areas of the state, that will be enough. But in Florida, it's very different. We have some big counties. But you
don't have those. You don't have those massive urban areas,
like outside of Broward,
Houston, or even in Dallas.
Outside of Broward, where they could net 400 to 700,000 votes, because they really pumped votes out of there in 2018. They pumped out more than Hillary Clinton for in that one area, which was what is very odd. If there was going to be turnout, Tim, increasing like that, you would have expected to see it in the rest of the state. But you didn't. You only saw it in Broward, which for those of you who don't know what I'm saying, I'm flatly saying they were up to something wrong. Because if you were going to see increases among those turnout levels, you would have saw them everywhere else. And what Tim is saying is there's really, outside of Broward, it's hard for Democrats to start banking up these big margins in high population centers. And then we have what we call it's like think of it like a counterpunch from a boxer. That's how results are reported in Florida. So you will start to see maybe 30% chunk-ins from areas of the state that are liberal, and it looks like an insurmountable lead is coming for a Democratic candidate. But then you have like the red left hook, the red like counter hook, and it's the wave that comes in from the central and northern part of the state. Collier County and Lee County and Bay start to pull in. Bay's always late to the party. So Bay's got like 50,000 in their net. So if it starts to get really tight, that's why on election night in 2016, we were like, it's over, because we knew her Broward vote was in. He was keeping that margin tight in Miami, or tighter. In Pinellas, he flipped, which Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott both lost Pinellas and still managed to hold the state. Why? Because Collier voted gangbusters, and so did Lee. Those are, like Tim is saying, there are population centers for Democrats. The problem is there are big red counties in Florida comparatively, right? Comparatively. I don't mean like big urban areas. I mean compared to the high population centers in Florida for Democrats. In many other states, Republicans simply don't have them. And so they're just trying to rack it up in rural areas to try to offset that. In Florida, there are big red counties that'll come in. You have the Villages with Lee, and you have Collier County, which is probably the most pro-Trump county in the state.
Naples.
Yeah, that's a great one. And it's at the point
Well, that's
now.
Collier. I mean,
yeah, well, that's what's driving that up.
Right.
It's at the point now where Democrats can peel Pinellas off. The media focuses on Hillsborough because it used to be the swing county, the bellwether in the state.
Tampa.
But in truth, Hillsborough County got markedly more Puerto Rican, which is one of the more liberal voting Hispanic blocks in the state. And it moved drastically in another direction to the point where it was no longer representative. It was no longer a microcosm of the state. And that became more like Pinellas was a better indicator. It's still a better indicator. But the problem is Republicans have made so many gains in other parts of the state. They can lose Monroe and Pinellas, not by a lot, but they proved that in 2018, that they can lose them along with Hillsborough. We know Democrats are going to carry Hillsborough now. We know that. It's no longer that, I don't want to say it's that important, but it's not the bellwether that they make it to be. But we showed in 2018 that we were absolutely right about that. They can lose Hillsborough County and lose Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Monroe and still carry the state, which was thought going back to 2012, was thought impossible. Impossible. Mitt Romney had to win Hillsborough County along with Pinellas, Monroe. He had to, or he had no shot. The problem is Trump has driven up some of these. Years ago, they were like 65-35 Republican counties. And because of what Tim is saying, there's no, outside of Broward, in some other areas, there's no real place. Broward is the biggest net gain for Democrats in the state. Outside of there, they have to contend with some other very, again, comparable high population areas. And there are a lot of red ones out there. So what used to be 65-35 is now 75-25 or even 80-20. I mean, we saw Trump get in the 80s in some of these counties, and people didn't realize, which by the way is why we favored the online panel. When we called on the phone, which we'll get into when we come back in the next segment, but data collection modes, Tim, when we called people on the phone, you would never get the 75-25 split on the phone. And if you look at the other traditional big media pollsters in Florida, they will tell you rural red areas, it's going to be like 58-30 something, 62-30. And it was not. And the only way we were able to measure that was online. And I'm going to pull up the graphs when we come back about data collection modes. And we're going to show people why, and I walked on foot to some of these places to see, is this true? And we would go to a place, really small town like Micanopy, because it's one burned in my brain. There were Trump flags everywhere. There were people who were voting who never voted in their life, or hadn't voted, maybe gave up in Bush v. Gore. Maybe was the last time.
And even with his margin of 1.2%, a little over 100,000 votes, that there was some lost votes in the Panhandle because that hurricane had gone through and just completely obliterated heavily red areas.
Dorian too.
Shortly before that.
And right? Dorian too. Dorian did in, I was actually shocked there that many votes came out of Bay in 2018. Right. I was stunned. But they didn't leave. They
were still motivated to vote, but that there had to be a little bit of a drop off.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rick Scott, he was like, he remembered. He said those people will remember. We were there for them with Irma. We were there for them with Dorian. They will vote, because I was thinking they will be lucky to get 25,000 net out of that area. And that's not normal, people. It's normally double that, and it's nice to have that, because what happens is that margin starts to tighten. And then the Democrats ahead by like 20,000 after Broward has got a little bit left that they're holding back, because what are they doing? They're filling in absentee ballots. Let me just tell you what they're doing. That's what they do. All right. And they hold them back. They fill in absentee ballots. And I'll say whatever I want, on this show. That is what they do. And the Bay County and those remaining areas have to have enough left that they simply can't fill in that much. right?
Right.
So
Right. Right.
11:30 for Friday. When we come back from this market update, we'll get into that and we'll take questions. 11:30 for Friday, April 24th. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit. If you don't follow me on Twitter, you can do so by at People's_Pundit right below. And I'm joined by Tim the Source Anderson, folks. Follow him on Twitter at TJ Anderson1. If you guys are on Periscope, go ahead and give us those likes and follow the accounts. All of that helps, and we greatly appreciate it. Facebook Live watchers, go ahead and like the page, People's Pundit Daily. It will, like YouTube, notify you when we go live. YouTube subscribers, I cannot stress this enough. Give us those thumbs up, but subscribe to the YouTube channel. Share it with other people that you know will love the show, and tell them to subscribe to. We are going to hit that milestone. All right. And ultimately, the best way to support the show, folks, is to subscribe to PPD, which is ppdnews.us/subscribe. You could go to People's Pundit Daily and find the digital subscriptions to subscribe. But the easiest way is the short link, ppdnews.us/subscribe. We're going to hit a market update. When we come back, we'll talk data collection modes. What's going on out there, Tim?
So really, there's not a lot going on. The markets are just slightly lower than they were an hour ago. The Dow was up 50 points. Now it's down 50 points. It's really not much of a move. It's in the red by 0.25%. It was positive by 0.25%. The S&P and the NASDAQ are just fractionally lower than they were an hour ago. The NASDAQ is almost dead even. The S&P 500 is just the same, almost dead even. The one positive out there is that oil is a little bit higher. Remember, we don't want to see oil get decimated like it did earlier in the week, and it's up about 2.5%, which is about 40 cents right now, above the $17 a barrel level. And bonds are pretty much just having an unchanged day. So yeah, oil is at $17.10. We want to see oil maybe continue to claw back some of that sharp decline it had from late last week and Monday and Tuesday when the May contract expired.
Nice. All right, guys. It is 11:36. So if you have any questions for Tim about the economy, I'm sure you're able to see him, right, Tim? And get him out before it is the end of the show, because Friday is the day that we all start to miss you guys and our little hangout together Monday through Friday. Over the weekend, it gets lonely. But yeah, so if you got those questions, go ahead and ask them. I did see the question about Trafalgar, and I'll get to them. I was waiting to mention that because I wanted to bring up another tweet, all right, that has to do with Trafalgar. He's mentioning Trafalgar in this tweet, okay? So I'm going to pop this up, and then I'll go back and show you my response, because we're talking about data collection modes, all right? Yesterday, Mark Hemingway on Twitter, he's Molly Hemingway's husband. He's a great follow, folks. If you guys don't follow him, I mean, I don't know if you'll always agree with him if you're a Trump supporter, for instance. I love his work. He's a staple for me. He really is. Him and his wife both do great work. But anyway, yesterday, in response to a tweet about Americans trust Trump more than Biden on almost every issue, and yet the president polls worse than his opponent in the general election. And then Mark, in response to that, said, and by the way, that is a very, very good sign for Donald Trump. If he loses the issue of the economy, then he's in trouble. But if you ask right now, who do you trust the most to handle the economy? Who do you trust the most to handle foreign policy? Who do you trust the most on immigration? The only issue that Joe Biden wins is healthcare and the environment. That's it. All right. Even the coronavirus, even though it's kind of close, Trump is still more trusted on the coronavirus. In response, Mark, who is at Herminator, by the way, if you want to follow, he's just a great follow. I cannot stress it enough. About the only pollster that accurately predicted swing states in 2016 asked voters, quote, who do you think your neighbor is voting for? And then he links to a Weekly Examiner, Washington Examiner article, and he opines, possible that people approve of Trump, but don't trust pollsters enough to bluntly tell a stranger they're voting for him. All right. And then to which I said, without mentioning to him that he is wrong and that he is Trafalgar is who he's talking about, Patrick over at Trafalgar. He is not the only one. All right. But anyway, he didn't do national polling. We are the only one who did national and state level. We just did different kind of polling modes, which big media does not accept and refuses to talk about. All right. But I'm going to get into this. And I responded, of course, there is social desirability bias, which is the phenomenon that he is referring to when he says that people maybe don't trust the polls, or maybe they're ashamed to tell the pollster, the interviewer, which is, by the way, it's not the pollster they're talking to, it's the interviewer. All right. These people hire call centers, folks. And yes, they're trained, but they're call centers. The pollster is the director of whoever's doing it, or the firm that is hired to do it. All right. And then they go out and typically they'll subcontract out a call center. That's how this works. Some of them have their own. But what he's referring to is something called social desirability bias. It does exist, but I don't subscribe to this school of thought on a large scale. Why? Different groups respond to different data collection modes at different rates. Again, different groups of people, and I'm talking about demographically, whether they be white voters, black voters, Hispanic voters, Asian voters, by education, by ideology, by party affiliation. Different people respond at different rates depending on the data collection mode. Okay. And you could say that the other way around too. Different people respond to different data collection modes at different rates. You will get a higher participation level among liberals or moderates who lean liberal if you call them on the cell phone. A conservative, on the other hand, generally speaking, especially a conservative woman who generally would participate, because females participate at higher rates than men do, which is also helpful to Democrats. They participate at higher rates than men. It is not uncommon in a phone poll for me to get a raw response of 60-40 female, even 65 percent female, 65-35, which is why we diversify the modes to reach a representative sample. So you will get, in 2016, Tim, it was a little bit different. The online panels are more liberal now than they were in 2016. Liberals have realized I better join online panels, and they did. All right. I'm going to take this off the screen. I made the point. Again, if you don't follow Herminator, follow Herminator. He's a great follow. And I'm going to overlay two things that I want to show you guys. Okay. In 2016, we worked with, or post 2016, we worked with the voter files database people that I show you every day. And one of the largest online panel suppliers, a lot of pollsters that you see with online panels get their panels from, get their responses. They pay per response to a company called Survey Sample International, or for short, SSI. They have now been bought by another company called Dynata, who is buying up everything, including the company that we use to build our crosstabs that you people have seen. All right. That is a company called MarketSite. And they have been bought up as well by Dynata. Our voter files have remained independent, and that's great and everything. But when you work together, you can really co-op on some great projects. And I want to show you this because it matters. One is party. There's two. Oh, great. It's a PNG, Tim, so you can halfway still see us. All right. Although I have to pop up and show them what each column means, because the other thing you cannot see. The first graph is the full voter file. Okay. You can see that a full voter file nationwide is just a little bit more Democrat than it is Republican. That is what a full voter file post 2016 looked like. So the electorate was generally D+3. If you were to parse out those independents and ask them what they are, that's about right. When the second column is what they were matched to the phone number. And as you can see, Republicans made some gains there. Democrats barely lost anything and what that means is we were actually able to verify that voter has a record with a phone number. The online panel alone is the third. That's 32% Republican, or just a tenth of a percentage point under, 32% Democrat, just about 34% independent. That is an even partisan split. That is the online panel. And that compares to the full voter file in the first column. And then the fourth one is online panels, individuals only, that were able to pair in a matched frame, meaning overlapped with the voter file. You'll notice it gets about D plus 3.5, which is almost exactly the electorate. What does this suggest? It suggests that mixed mode is going to get you a more representative sample of the electorate, that one or the other is not, they all have their own benefits and they all have their own advantages, but that you will miss some part of the total picture if you rely solely on phone collection or you rely solely on online collection. The reason why 2016 worked out so well for us is because of the next frame, and I'm going to show you. In 2018 and beyond, we did not see the online panel as representative as it was in 2016. And that is why you saw a lot of what we do move to mixed mode, because the data suggested that each collection mode was collecting representative samples for different groups at different rates. And that the best thing to do was use every tool you had in the tool shed. That's what you should. But I want to say this before I put this up, because you're going to see this and you're going to say, why on earth do they keep doing this way, Rich? Because live polling is a lot of money. That's it. You want to know my opinion? That's it. It costs a lot more. And media outlets have big budgets, or big compared to some private clients. Unless it's a very, national race, Tim, presidential campaigns, they have big budgets. I'm saying a lot of media pollsters don't make a lot on the margin polling for media outlets. So how do they make that up? By using more expensive data collection modes. And it's tradition. It was been viewed as the gold standard for years. And as anybody who knows anything about history or industry will tell you, it is hard to break a status quo in an industry. It is hard to make them evolve. Here's another chart, okay? This one has a white background, so it's going to block me and Tim out. I'm going to put it flat up. This is the 2016 general election, and to the right is the 2016 presidential primary election. The first row of bars is the full voter file. The second row are those the same way it was before, matched to the phone, where we can tell we had a phone number on record for the voter file. Just like the other one, the third shows the online panel alone, the totality of the online panel, and then the online panel individual only that was scrubbed and made sure that we were able to cross records. Okay. You will see the first row, look at the file and how many people didn't vote. In the general election, 32% of the voter file, the totality of the voter file. And how should you think of this, folks? When we do our voter analysis and I say we're going to cast a large net, a wide net, no likely voter screens, nothing. We're going to show you how close Texas is when we just cast a wide net, or how close the partisan edge is when we just cast a wide net in Georgia. That's that number. 32% of them did not vote. That's why we always show you the screen. Are they at least 50% likely to vote or not? Or are they less than? We went to what yesterday, Tim? 30% in Georgia, just to prove a point, right? 32% in that first round. This is the general, not the primary. The primary's to the right, general's to the left. The full voter file, the wide net, 32% did not vote. In the presidential primary, nearly 7 in 10 voters on the voter file did not vote. When we match it to the phone, people that, and this makes sense because it's verifiable. When we match it to the phone, the record is more accurate. You'll see a higher turnout. They voted at higher rates. Only 27% didn't vote in the general election, and still 65% in the primary election. About 50% voted in the general when we are looking at voters who we can match to the phone records. Okay. They have a record. It's a high connect line, meaning it's going, if we were to call their landline or their phone number or their mobile number, whatever is on their record in their voter file, we know they're going to connect. They're high connects. They're matched to the phone, and those records meet with their name, their address, everything. 50% voted. The third line is the totality of the online panel. you'll see 53%, 3% more than even the cross-referenced voter file, 3% more for our online panels voted than did from the voter file. So if you're sourcing a poll, you're calling people who may or may not vote. My point is, who is going to have a more accurate likely voter model if our panels are voting at higher rates? Okay. And then, of course, if you look at the presidential primary, it's about 29%, which is about 2% higher than the voter file that's been matched to the phone. It's 4% higher than the full voter file. On the general election side, it's 6% higher. Even 2 to 3% swings can have enormous impacts on polls. So if you thought that 6% was going to vote but didn't vote, and those 6%, that 6% group of people is in your poll but doesn't show up on election day, you're in a lot of trouble as a pollster. You're in deep trouble. You're going to be wrong. It's going to happen. Online panels with an individual only, not the household level, an individual only, stayed at 53% about the totality of the online panel, which tells us that the online panel is more accurate record by record. It means we know we're looking at an individual voter and we're not seeing overlap there with households, and they have records, so we know their records match to their phone, etc. Okay. Online panel individual only for the presidential primary. Again, the change was not much between the totality of the online panel and the individual level, which again tells us for the presidential primary and the general election that these are people we know. We absolutely know we can trust to have voted. All right. That's my point here, folks. If you are including all of those people in your poll, you saw how voter files are great sources. They are. And I'm not taking away from it. Everybody should be sourced through a voter file. Random digital dialing is a thing of the past. It is a bygone era. It used to be fine when most of the population was eligible to vote, Tim. But now we have adults that really have no business voting. They'll never vote. They're not eligible to vote. There's no reason why you should not be using the voter file universe as your baseline. Random digital dial, there's no point in having a voter file. When you take a targeted random sample or a random sample out of a voter file, there is no reason to use random digital dial. You take the whole list and you put it into your survey software and you fire away and you reach as many people as you can. You draw a big enough list, and it's so that you collect enough responses to make it a representative sample. But do you see the difference between what the media polls do? There are tons of people that they're polling that don't belong in the electorate and will not end up in the electorate, is my point. The online panels that we use voted at much higher rates. Much higher rates. What are your thoughts on that before I hit up questions here?
I think it's a very important point because I'm sure a lot of people wonder, how can you see such disparity between media poll A and media poll B, and between media polls and other more independent polls that come out from independent polling operations?
Yeah, and Patrick, from Trafalgar, after the election, I think it was on a Neil interview, maybe Neil Cavuto, but he tried to bare bones explain the difference between random digital dial, which is what Quinnipiac still does. I mean, they may have moved since, but they did in 2018. The difference between, there's no point to call these people, Tim, not unless you're looking at the opinion of the entire population of American adults. When we're talking about political issues, the electorate, there's just no, it's a relic, and there's no reason to even argue. Nate Cohen at the New York Times, I got to give it out to him, by the way. He is at least trying, and he's partnered with Siena. They are voter file based. They are using likely voter screens that are tight. This is why I wanted to show people when we go through those voter analysis. Here's the totality of Texas. Yes, it looks close, but this is why we don't weight these polls like this. That is not going to be what the electorate looks like. It's simply not going to be. I got a great question about congressional races. Are they easy to poll? Actually, they're notoriously difficult to poll, depending on the district, because it's not a large sample. It's not a large population. And you need a certain sample size to have, I'm talking about how many responses you collect to be able to get a representative sample of the population. And what happened in 2018, Tim, is that everybody and their mother wanted a poll. They realized there was big money in it because nobody trusted the polls anymore. So, some new kid on the block could come in and try it. And everybody was polling the same district with 150,000 people in it, and you just, after a while, you can't burn them out. It's called fatigue. With online panel, we call it panel fatigue, but it was like voter file fatigue. Everybody and their mother was polling Dana Rohrabacher. After a while, people were just like, leave me the hell alone. I'm not picking up this phone anymore. Sadly, people don't understand how polling is done. That's the whole hope of these segments on this show, to be able to give you guys a much better understanding of the difference. Because like Tim just said, how could it be one polling outlet will go out there, Fox News will come out with Donnelly +7, while Harvard-Harris says Braun by 3, it's a 10-point difference. There is no real reason for that. And that's because particularly the data collection modes that the big media refer to as the gold standard, they favor liberal voting groups. And by the way, groups who are not highly likely, but more likely not to actually vote. So think about how much this can screw up a poll versus an election result. You're talking to people who are more likely to participate in your survey, but less likely to actually go and vote. And then there's inherent problems with panel polls, like YouGov, who incentivize people to take surveys by giving them like gift cards or something. Tim, take a survey and earn this many points. Earn this many points, get a gift card. All you're going to get is somebody who wants to take that gift card and go run to Best Buy or Kohl's or whatever they're getting it from. Will they actually go and vote? Well, I think it's pretty clear after 2016 and 2018 that their younger groups were not actual, potential likely voters. They weren't. They were just people who were trying to get points and trying to get gift cards. Because if you go and look inside their polls, and you will see those groups were not reliable, and those margins were not anywhere near realistic. It just never happened. It just never happened. What about Fox polls favor cell phone collection, and also they do landlines, but if you're just going to have a 70-30 split, 60-40 split, even a 50-50 split, you will get, the problem is with that, you'll get Republicans that are like Metro Republicans, Tim, and they don't actually vote. So it screws up. The president's only going to get 85% of the Republican vote, or the Republican candidate for whatever is only going to get 85%, because they're using those results and extrapolating out into areas and regions that they missed. And education and region were two groups of people in both 2016 and 2018. And again, Nate Cohen did a better job than most people. He noticed that. He noticed education was a major problem, and so was region. And you cannot take responses that you're getting from the suburbs of Monmouth County and extrapolate it out to what are remaining areas of rural New Jersey. You just can't do it. That's why those polls, that's why Fox, if you look at the rural vote, it's going to tell you 55-35. On election day, folks, it's going to be 75-25 or maybe even more. And that's unfortunate. Fox at this point, I'm not even sure they're interested in learning their lesson. I'm really not. But wow, we burned through. It's 11:58. Last time we went through that spiel. Anything else you want to add, Tim, before we
No, the markets are doing a little bit better than they were 30 minutes ago. So, but still they're just trading within a relatively tight range. It'd be interesting to see how we close the week. I think a lot of people are have a guarded optimism about next week with some of the states starting to reopen, and we'll just we'll see where we go from there. We'll get a Q1 GDP report next Wednesday. It'll be interesting to look at, but it won't necessarily mean a whole lot, because the whole real impact is how we come out of this.
Yeah. That's a great way to guarded optimism. I'm going to leave it right at that, folks. Again, it is Friday, April 24th. Thanks for watching Inside the Numbers, folks, with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris. You can follow along at Peoples_Pundit on Twitter. And I'm joined by Tim the Source Anderson. Follow him if you don't, folks, on Twitter at TJ Anderson1. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the show, folks. And if you want to support the show, to subscribe to People's Pundit Daily. All the best. Have a great, happy, and safe weekend. And we'll see you back on Monday